Why a German general called an American map of Germany unfair, Reconnaissance, December 16, 1944. A farmhouse cellar near Schnee Eifel, close to the German border with Belgium. A German staff officer unfolds a map across a wooden table by the light of a single hurricane lamp. It is not one of his own. It has been recovered from a captured American reconnaissance vehicle hours earlier, and as his finger moves across it, his expression changes. Every farm track is there. Every drainage ditch wide enough to bog a half-track is marked. Bridges are annotated with load capacities down to the tonne. Even a disused quarry road, barely used since before the war, appears correctly graded. This is his own country. He has walked some of these lanes as a boy, and an enemy on the other side of an ocean has drawn them more precisely than his own general staff ever did. He is said to have muttered a single word: unfair. It is a small moment, almost a footnote, and the exact phrasing has not survived in any verified transcript. But the sentiment behind it is extensively documented, and it points to one of the least glamorous, most consequential achievements of the Second World War: the mapping of Germany by its enemies, carried out with such thoroughness that by the winter of 1944, American and British cartographers arguably understood the German landscape better than the Wehrmacht itself. This is the story of how that happened, and why a folded sheet of paper could unsettle a professional soldier more than an approaching column of tanks. For most of the war, geography favored Germany. Its officers had grown up on the ground they defended, trained on it, marched across it in peacetime maneuvers. The Allies, by contrast, were fighting toward a country most of their soldiers had never seen, using maps that were, in the early years, badly out of date. Pre-war German civilian survey sheets existed, but they were designed for tourists and tax assessors, not for artillery officers trying to calculate whether a river crossing could bear the weight of a Sherman tank. Contour intervals were too coarse. Road classifications did not distinguish between a metalled highway and a farm track that turned to mud after autumn rain. Worse, Germany had systematically restricted detailed mapping of its own border regions since the 1930s. Treating accurate terrain data as a security asset to be denied to any future invader. The paradox this created was severe. The closer the Allies got to German soil, the less reliable their information became, at precisely the moment operational precision mattered most. An armored advance that misjudged a single unmarked ravine or an overloaded bridge could lose men and machines it could not spare. This was not a new problem in principle. Armies had always fought at a disadvantage on unfamiliar ground, but the scale of the coming campaign made the old workarounds useless. A single infantry division advancing through wooded, hilly terrain might need hundreds of individual map sheets, updated weekly, coordinated across artillery, engineers, armor, and air support simultaneously, all working from the same version of the truth. A map that was accurate in September but wrong by November, after German engineers had blown a bridge or dug new anti-tank ditches, was not simply unhelpful. It was dangerous. Commanders needed something closer to a living document than a printed one, a source of terrain intelligence that could be revised almost as fast as the ground itself changed. The answer came not from spies or captured documents, though both played a part, but from something more methodical. Aerial photography, flown in overlapping strips, stereoscopically analyzed and cross-referenced against every fragment of existing data the Allies could gather. Britain's geographical section, General Staff, working alongside the Royal Air Force's Central Interpretation Unit at Danesfield House in Buckinghamshire, and the American Army Map Service, headquartered in Washington but printing forward in theater, built an entire industrial process around turning photographs into maps. Reconnaissance aircraft, principally modified Spitfires and Mosquitoes stripped of guns and armor for speed, flew repeated passes over the same German territory, sometimes years apart, so that interpreters could compare images and spot new construction, road repairs, or troop concentrations. Photo interpreters, many of them women recruited for their patience and eye for detail, examined thousands of prints a day through stereoscopic viewers no larger than a shoebox, extracting three-dimensional terrain data from what most people would see as flat, grainy photographs. The resulting maps, published in series such as GSGS 4416, were produced at scales fine enough to show individual buildings and were revised continually as fresh photography arrived, sometimes within days of a front-line advance. Bridges were rated for weight. Forest density was noted because it affected whether a tank could leave the road. Soil types were recorded because sandy ground near the Rhine drained differently to the clay further east, a detail that mattered enormously to any engineer planning a pontoon crossing. Printing was done on portable offset presses that followed the armies forward, some housed in converted lorries, so that a map corrected from photography taken on a Tuesday could be in a company commander's hands by the weekend. By the time of the Normandy landings alone, more than 3,000 distinct map sheets had been prepared, and production for the whole European theater would eventually run into the hundreds of millions of individual printed copies, though exact wartime totals remain difficult to reconstruct precisely because so much of the material was destroyed or dispersed after 1945. If you're finding this interesting, a quick subscribe helps more than you know. Documented use of these maps ran from the beaches of Normandy through the Bocage country, where hedgerow density had been badly underestimated before June 1944 and corrected rapidly afterward, to the Rhineland and the Ardennes itself. Combat engineers attached to formations such as the 12th Army Group relied on gridded overprints layered onto the topographic base, allowing artillery to call in fire missions using coordinates rather than landmarks alone. Accounts describe using bridge classification numbers printed directly on the map to decide, in the field and under fire, whether a crossing could take a Sherman or only a Jeep. What is far less well documented is the German side of these encounters. Surviving accounts are fragmentary, often second-hand, and historians are careful to note that specific reactions, including the Ardennes anecdote that opened this account, rest on limited and sometimes uncorroborated testimony. German cartography, by contrast, suffered from the compartmentalization typical of the Nazi state. The Wehrmacht, the Luftwaffe, and various party organizations guarded their own surveys jealously rather than pooling them into a single standardized system. Aerial reconnaissance assets were increasingly grounded by Allied air superiority after 1943, meaning German cartographers lost the ability to photograph and verify their own territory at precisely the moment American and British units gained it in abundance. Updated photography of Germany's own western regions became genuinely difficult to obtain in the war's final year, forcing German staff officers to rely on older civilian surveys, some dating back to the 1920s, for terrain that had since been reshaped by bombing, flooding, and hastily dug defensive works. The Americans faced no such handicap once air superiority was secured, and their production system, centralized under the Army Map Service and standardized in symbology with the British Geographical Section, easily outpaced the fractured German equivalent. It is one of the odder inversions of the war. The defender, fighting on home ground, became the party with the poorer map, while the invader carried a terrain record more current than anything the defending army could produce for itself. The legacy of this effort outlived the guns. Techniques developed for wartime photo interpretation fed directly into post-war aerial survey and eventually into satellite reconnaissance during the Cold War. Several original GSGS and Army Map Service sheets survive today in the collections of the British National Archives at Kew and the United States National Archives in College Park, Maryland, where researchers can still examine the pencil corrections made by interpreters working from photographs taken over enemy territory decades ago. So return, for a moment, to that cellar near the Schnee Eifel. A tired officer, a borrowed lamp, a map of his own homeland drawn by strangers. It was not built from treachery or captured secrets alone. It was built from patience. Thousands of photographs, thousands of hours at a stereoscope, printed and reprinted as the front moved. No single weapon won the war, But information, gathered relentlessly and turned into something a soldier could unfold across a table, shaped how every other weapon was used. The general folded the map that night, uncertain of what lay ahead. The Allies, in a very real sense, already knew.